Hello and welcome to episode 96 of the Ego Chall podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we have the official Call of Duty League season rule set upon us, and we will be going through that, talking about the maps and modes that will be involved for this upcoming CDL season. We also have some roster not necessarily change, but starting lineup changes already happening in the CDL before the season even officially begins. And Scrappy has become the true villain that the CDL has always needed. He picked up the mantle that was left by Aches, and he has continued on with the tradition. And we'll get into some of the stuff that he's been saying on stream and on Twitter over the last week or so. But before we get into any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Doing all right. Like you said, well, I guess we don't have really a ton to talk about, which I guess, but regardless, yeah, I'm doing all right, and yeah, I don't got much to add, so we're good to go.
All right, we're gonna start with the rule set. So the Call of Duty League announced the maps and modes. I believe we already knew the modes, but they announced the official maps for the first version of the CDL rule set for this season, and we have 5 hardpoint maps, 5 search and destroy maps, and 3 control maps. And I believe there's only 6 total maps involved, a lot of crossover between these 3 modes. So I'll just go one by one and we can kind of talk about them. Starting with Hardpoint, Invasion, Karachi, Skid Row, Subbase, and Terminal. These have been the maps that teams have been scrimming on stream. So I figured if there was any kind of like a surprise contender, that would be pretty shocking. Those were the only maps that I had seen. What do you think of the hard point pool? Invasion, Karachi, Skid Row, Subbase, and Terminal. Is that enough? Are there any maps that you think should have been included in addition to those, or any of those maps that you thought probably shouldn't have made the cut?
I mean, obviously, I haven't scrimmed or played competitively like these guys, so if that's like has pro player input in it, then that's gonna be a more educated opinion than me. But um, the big thing that jumps out to me is no scrapyard. We've talked about it on both ends of the argument, really, because I was of the mindset heading into the season that scrapyard wasn't going to be a part of the rule set simply because I thought it's definitely like the smallest map in the game outside of Rust, and it just due to the pace of play nowadays, I didn't think it would actually fit. But I feel like they were scrimming on it a little bit at the start, so there was like a glimmer of hope that potentially scrapyard would be a part of the rule set. And now, we don't know the reason for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was one of the main reasons it was decided not to be included, was just because it was potentially too chaotic, too small. Spawns were probably fluky just because of the size of the map and people spawning everywhere. I don't really know, but yeah, that's the one that stands out to me. Obviously, Subbase is an interesting addition. Probably told somebody in 2009 that Subbase was going to be a competitive map. They probably wouldn't have like that very much. And I think one of the hard points is like on one of the submarines or something, and there's like no cover. It's kind of a weird hard point. So I don't know how long that one's gonna stick around. Potentially, if we get some other maps, that could be one that gets the axe down the road. But that's initially just looking at it. One of the things we've talked about since the beginning, once we knew like the map pool for MW3 as a game being all MW2 remakes, is we knew that Hardpoint's not going anywhere in the CDL, and none of these maps were created when Hardpoint was a mode. So um, we've brought it up a couple times now, just discussing how that was going to play out. Well, if Hardpoint was going to work on these maps, yada yada, and they're going to do what they can with what they have here. But some of these maps were staples in competitive MW2 back in the day. Although there wasn't high rise, you saw almost the same exact map pool for search and destroy. I know I'm getting a little ahead here, but back then it was high rise invasion, Karachi, scrapyard, and terminal for search and MLG variant on game battles. So it's essentially the same thing now with Skid Row replacing scrapyard. Um, so yeah, that's very minor changes, even though it's literally completely different modes being played on these maps over a decade plus. Um, and yeah, I'm just gonna have to wait to see some more action before I'm able to give some stronger opinions on like how hardpoint and stuff play on these maps.
Yeah, I haven't, other than pubs and stuff, I haven't really been able to play a lot or much of these maps in this specific mode of hardpoint. But from what people have been saying publicly, pro players or challengers players, respawns is it's not very good on this game, which is unsurprising. Like you've mentioned, it not being these maps weren't developed for hardpoint. When I think not or using game modes that weren't developed or the maps weren't developed for those game modes, that can be very tricky. And the movement system is completely different, so the way these maps are essentially can be interacted with by the players is very different. Maps that used to be very big and you'd have to trek a long time to get across. It's a lot easier to get across now with tac sprint. And there's no like marathon essentially, but that's kind of like the norm is that you can sprint longer, you can sprint faster. So things are the timing of everything is different. But the sub base hardpoint thing that you brought up is interesting. That one of the hills is literally on the submarine, and it's like a very specific part. Like it's not just the whole submarine; it's just like the top end part of it. And I was watching a scrim. I think it was Optic Carolina, but I'm almost positive it was Carolina because it was Clayster stream, and they were scrimming someone, and that sub base hardpoint ended 250 to 249, and the last hill was the submarine hill. So they were all trying to get the scrap time on the submarine. So if that actually happened in competitive, it would be insane just because like you said, there's no cover. It's very tiny. Everything is out in the open, and there's like 5 or 6 different angles that you can get shot from. So maybe it'll be interesting from a viewer's perspective, and I think in general that is kind of what we're going for. If this can be an entertaining, game mode or entertaining map from a viewer's perspective, then it's kind of secondary that the players may not like some of these maps or some of these modes as much. And depending on how unpopular sub base, just for example, is among pro players, maybe we won't see it very much and teams will just permaban it out of competitive. We've seen that quite a bit. Specific teams have their instant, bans or instant picks when they do the veto system. So it'll be really interesting. I think a lot of these hardpoint maps are really, really difficult. There's always one hill that's almost unbreakable. Like Terminal is Burger Town for sure, because it's literally just a counter that you can snake behind, and there's cover behind it. You have to cross. So there's always you can have guys sitting like like back library around security, and they can just watch P1 and pretty much just pick everyone off, and then you have one guy snaking in the hill. It's just a nightmare. It seems pretty bad from a competitive perspective, but it could make maps more interesting if you know that that a team can actually get a full 60 on Burger Town and kind of even up a game. I haven't really seen that much of Invasion, Karachi, Skid Row, that like anything that pops out. Like I've watched quite a few maps, but nothing that really stands out from those. Although the spawns seem to be pretty wacky with all of these maps, to be honest. Search and Destroy is next, though. And this is probably, like you said, Search and Destroy has always been a part of competitive, so it's not as different for a competitive player for these maps specifically to be involved. High Rise, Invasion, Karachi Terminal, and Skid Row are the Search and Destroy maps, so pretty much the exact same as Hardpoint, but you sub out Sub Base for High Rise, and that is your S&D map pool. Um, I don't know, like I think this is probably a pretty good map pool. I think it was obvious that High Rise from the beta was going to be an S&D map unless there was just a bunch of maps that could fit into this game mode upon launch, but I think most people figured that was not going to be the case, considering it wasn't necessarily the case when MW2 was around in the first. MW2 was around in the first place, and these maps were a part of it. Any thoughts on High Rise, Invasion, Karachi Terminal, and Skid Row S&D?
Yeah, I like most of these maps and are ones that I've played countless times now at this point over the years in GBs. So I really enjoy Invasion and Karachi. I think Karachi was probably my favorite map. I used to like love doing lightweight marathon rushes with my silenced and MW2 back in the day there, and get the bomb down at B, which is the one by Diner. At least I think it was and is. I
Yeah,
don't know.
it's
There's the
side
bomb there by the
diner.
bus.
Yeah,
Um,
behind the bus. Yeah.
I knew the bombs. I just couldn't remember if it was A or B. And we've had that issue where they've switched the names of bombs, or even raid control is the one that sticks out to me. I remember them swapping that on us. Just difficult. But anyway, the big thing that I remember, and this could have been patched potentially in patches since then, because I don't think I've played a lot of pub S&D since launch night, but on launch night I was playing with my cousin and had Chall correspondent Trim. Uh, you might have been playing too at that time. I don't remember, but we were playing High Rise Search and Destroy, and I was planning the bomb and the one bomb, and now I can't remember if that's B or A. I think it's B in the little room by the elevators. And I was planning the bomb, and somebody like flashed underground, and a barrel blew up underground. It killed me through the bomb site, like through the floor. And I've seen other clips Tremor has sent them of like just explosions, not even near people killing them on high rise. So like I said, I don't know if that's been addressed by the developers yet or anything, but obviously that's a huge like issue. If that's not addressed in S&D, you could literally, have somebody outside the bomb trying to sound whore a little bit, and like if you just hear somebody going into that bomb site, you could in theory just like throw a nade underground, it blows up a barrel, and you might randomly get bombed down in sight, even if that's not where you're throwing your stuff. Um, that's just something that I've seen some clips of, and I experienced it myself in that one pub. But again, that was launch night, so it could have been addressed by now. I honestly haven't looked into it really, or thought much of it until just now. So if we do see that happen, the CDL would be definitely very unfortunate, and that could then be the catalyst for change. But let's hope it doesn't get to that point before that. Other than that, for the S&D maps, yeah, I mean, Terminal is going to be uh, interesting. I think in High Rise too, in terms of snipers. If snipers aren't G8, if we get to see them, we could have some good sniper battles on those two maps. Um, I mean, you could really see sniper be used. There's some long lines of sights on all of those maps, but obviously there's the iconic spawn sniping in High Rise. That you would definitely see that be prevalently used if snipers aren't G8, and then in Terminal you can there's definitely through the hallway, or even like through some of the outdoor sites, you can kind of see into library if you're outside by the plane, or into the plane you can see into library. You can kind of see down the hallway towards the one site in red over there. But yeah, there's some interesting angles and lines of sight that could benefit snipers, especially on high rise and terminal in my opinion, but could potentially be seen on all maps. Again, that will depend though on if snipers are actually allowed or if they are GA'd. But I'm excited to see, for me personally, and for probably some other longtime fans of Call of Duty, it'll definitely bring back some memories once we get into the heat of the competition here, and it'll definitely be interesting to see what similarities and differences there are in terms of like specific strategies and stuff on these maps. Because like I said, I mean, even back in MW2, I was saying I liked Marathon and Lightweight Pro using a silent UMP and going for bomb rushes. Like that was obviously very fast back then, but are the routes going to be as fast in today, even with the different perks? Or maybe a map, just for the sake of the example, maybe a map like Karachi doesn't play as fast today as it did back then, or vice versa. That's some things I'll be looking out and trying to analyze myself once we get into the actual action of the season.
And with the recent GA that players have to have a pistol now, they can't use the melee knife. That changes the timings as well because previously it was faster obviously if you had the knife and you could sprint, um and you could have like lightweight boots or whatever the jacket is called to increase your tack sprint, so that could change the timings of it. Now everybody has a pistol, which obviously changes things, and there's less than a month until you know only actually a few weeks until we start online CDL play, which is pretty interesting. I was actually looking while you were talking on the MW3 Trello board to see if they had anything about the S&D bomb stuff. And the only S&D stuff that I can see is they haven't fixed ping exploits can give players an unfair advantage in search and destroy. And they resolved an issue where bomb site A could be planted from an unintended location on terminal S&D. So,
That's on like the wing of the plane, I think.
yeah. Um,
But it's not even S&D. I mean, it could be an issue with control. We haven't technically talked about control yet, but that's just something with high rise in general. With there's obviously a ton of barrels around the map, and if they explode near somebody, they should kill them. But it's when they're exploding and then killing somebody in a completely different area that's the problem. Um, so I doubt it's been raised or
yeah.
is addressed. But and then unfortunately, the scenario I mentioned a couple minutes ago is probably it's gonna take somebody dying in a ridiculous fashion and at Major One for it to be highlighted. Which again, I hope it doesn't come to that. But if it's not been fixed or addressed yet, that's potentially a likely scenario.
Yeah, would that fall under the dynamic map elements setting? Because if so, that could be like the CDL could just make that a setting in their game.
It could. I don't think barrels count as dynamic elements, but I guess they could in theory. That's a good question.
I mean, that would be the best way because then the devs actually don't need to do anything. The league, like in game battles or CMG or
Yeah.
even the CDL, they can just make it a setting so that you shoot a barrel, it doesn't really do anything. It's just like another piece of cover essentially. Um,
I don't know the settings, but I know Tremor sent a clip of him playing a GB or a wager and one of his teammates getting blown up from like a ridiculous length away from where the explosion was. So um unless dynamic map elements isn't a part or isn't a setting that needs to be changed or something like that, I don't think it counts, but could be wrong. We might have to do some testing after the show.
yeah. And the final maps are High Rise Invasion and Karachi for Control. I've only seen, I don't think I've seen Karachi Control. I think I've seen one map of Invasion Control, and I saw Exceed's clip of a high rise control where he got on top of the building
Yeah.
with his MCW and he could see literally the whole map. And obviously in control, there's like one side of the map has A, one of the sides of the map has B, so he could literally see both points. He could see call out everything, and yeah, that was not great. And then Asim was bringing him ammo boxes up there so he could stay up and call out stuff. So that'll be interesting. I mean, I don't really see it happening very often, but once would just be nice just to see it in on a competitive map. Um, but high rise invasion, Karachi control. I don't know how much control you've seen. I don't think that there are a lot of fans in the competitive community about control. I've seen people calling for capture the flag to come back as the third game mode. I've seen fewer people, but I should say that I have seen people call for domination to be the third game mode. Um, what do you think? Is it if control is so unplayable, and maybe it's not, maybe it's kind of the same as it has been where it's ridiculously defensive sided, and 60-70% of the rounds are going to be won by defense, but if it is so unplayable, what should be the solution for the CDL? How do they handle that? What do they do without a competitive or have a viable third game mode?
We've had this conversation earlier in the off season of potentially going to like a for best of fives a 2 hardpoint 3 S&D or a 3 hardpoint 2 S&D format. Um, as long as control is actually a part, I don't think there's going to be a change in that regard. Like it would be kind of wild if the league decided mid-season to just take out a whole mode. Obviously, maps being added and dropped are big changes, but I feel like an entire mode would just be a whole different level of a change that hasn't happened previously. So I think we're stuck with control this year for good or bad. Um, what we've talked earlier too about potential for before we knew what the modes were, if capture the flag was even going to be in the game, if that had any potential. Um, Even a mode like demolition we just brought up because that's what was played. These maps were played on in MLG variant back in the day. But obviously I don't think demolition is even a part of this game. So um, it seems like we got control. That's the hand we're dealt. We're gonna have to deal with it. It's just we're gonna have to figure out what maps are the best for it. Like you, I haven't really watched too much. I did see that clip of Exceed on High Rise. I saw another one from Beezy. I don't remember if I don't know if you remember him, but um he was like he got like a spawn kill 6 piece or 9 piece on Karachi.
Yeah,
Um and
that
it
was
was pretty
ridiculous.
funny. So um yeah, I haven't seen much control outside of that. The good thing is that even if it's not the best in this current state, it's only one map in every best of five. Obviously, it would be better if there was just a strong third game mode and we didn't have to have a debate about whether this should be in or not. But
Mhm.
like I said earlier, that's the hand we're dealt, and we're gonna have to make the best of it.
I think this would be a good time to mention some of the maps that are coming for season one. Um, Obviously, that meat map probably not going to be a part of competitive because
Why not?
they said it was very small, which was an
Oh,
interesting choice of words. But the other maps that are coming in season one is Greece, and that's gonna be at launch for season one, and then Rio is coming, I think, mid season one at the Reloaded update. We have had in the past where DLC maps have become competitive maps. It's not super common. It's pretty rare that it happens, but it does happen. And we've also seen Mercado uh, Las Almas, was it? Mercado from last year. That was already in the game as part of a playlist. So I think that's interesting that's obviously that was a competitive map last year. You would think that it would be able to be played on this current game, and that it could be a part of the competitive map set. Obviously, players, the teams haven't been playing on it, and it's actually not even in custom games, so they pretty much can't. But if it were to be added in as like a permanent map, I think that would be, I know that Mercado is not like the most popular map or anything, but I think just having more options would be nice for competitive. It would be it's healthier to have, instead of 5 hardpoint maps, 6 hardpoint maps, 7, 8, 9, just a if we could get all of the MW2 maps, and then you could kind of pick and choose which of these maps you want, and teams can actually be more strategic. They could decide, well, we're not going to practice these two maps because we're always going to ban them, and we're going to get really good at these other maps that other teams aren't very well versed on, or they're not practicing as much. I think that adds more strategy than you really only have a pretty limited number of maps. I don't know if you have any thoughts on. Obviously, we don't know how Greece and Rio would play because we don't know what those maps are really going to look like. But something like Mercado or even other maps from MW2 potentially making their way into the MW3 competitive map set.
yeah, I think it would definitely be weird to have Mercado essentially in back-to-back years. Obviously, we've had cases where, like, in Cold War, we had Raid and Standoff and Express and maps like that that are iconic in Call of Duty history, coming back to the current day competitive scene several years after their release. But I obviously can't think of a time where a map from the previous game was used in the next game's competitive map pool, let alone a year where a map from the previous year's game was in the public playlist for the next year's game. I can't really think of that. So um yeah, I think obviously it'll definitely be wishful thinking if we get a solid DLC map that could be used competitively. Um, we can hope and pray that one of them will work out, but um, unfortunately, in the past two, there's historically been some strong DLC maps that come towards the end of the life cycle of the game, and then they aren't able to be a part of the competitive rule set because it's either the season's over or it's almost over, and at that point they're not looking to change the rule set. So, really, if a DLC map is going to have a shot to be added to the CDL rule set for 2024, it's gonna be one of these like season 1 or season 2 maps. And then it'll be a question of if those maps are actually competitively viable or not. Um, Depending on the schedule for this year, maybe a season 3 map could have a shot, but I feel like any map added to MW3 after the season 3 would just definitely be off the table because it would just be by that point the season's almost over.
Yeah, I think it would just be better if we could get these maps in at some point earlier on in the season, just to give more variety and maybe establish a different meta. But yeah, I don't think it's the most likely thing. We haven't really heard anything from the developers or the CDL about it, and I haven't heard any pros talking about it either. But it would be an interesting little wrinkle into the season. Let's talk about real quick about the MLG variant, because the competitive variant for MLG, obviously game battles, is quite different than the one we have in the CDL. The game modes that they're rolling with, SND, of course, capture the flag, and demolition.
Wait, that's the old rule set.
Oh, never mind. Then I will pull up the new rule set. So the new rule set is, excuse me, let's scroll down here. Search and destroy, domination. Wait, no. Search and destroy, capture the flag, demolition, right?
Should just be the same as the CDL. Know what you're trying to look for. I just use that link as a look at the old MW2 set so we could compare
Oh,
like Scrapyard
oh,
and that stuff.
gotcha. I thought this was for MW3. Yeah, my
So
bad.
Game Battles variant does have a Scrapyard in it on MW3. I can link that quick in our notes.
Yeah, so the original
Um,
MW2, that MLG variant was SND, CTF, and demo.
yeah,
Yeah,
no
so
CTF and demo in this, but yeah, so for this, the GB variant does feature Scrapyard. Search and Destroy's High Rise Invasion, Karachi Scrapyard, Skid Row Terminal. Same hardpoint for GB variant is High Rise Invasion, Karachi Scrapyard Terminal, so no sub base there. And then Control is High Rise Invasion, Karachi Scrapyard Terminal, so Scrapyard and Terminal added for Control. Um,
interesting.
you probably just have a setting for CDL variant to be on, and then you would just use the rule set on the CDL site. That's how it worked previously.
Yeah.
But I'm not match finder real quick.
I mean,
GB
Scrapyard
variant.
Hardpoint and Scrapyard Control, just so ridiculous. Like, I want to see it because I didn't actually. I know you've talked about how you had seen like some of the maps played on that, but I hadn't seen any. I had just seen search on it, and even that was kind of hectic. So respawn would be crazy.
Yeah, there actually isn't a CDL setting on GB yet, and maybe there won't be because of GB shutting down. But
Yeah,
on the match finder, there's GB variant control, which is you would just play like whatever you could play a best of one control, a best of three, or best of five control. GB variant hardpoint, GB variant search, and then GB variant search and destroy all 16 maps. That would be spicy. Some GB variant S&D on Overgrown and Derail.
yeah. I would probably just forfeit all those maps. If I got put in Wasteland Hardpoint, I'm just like logging off. It's probably just be like one big hill is the grass or something. Yeah, I mean that's interesting. It seems weird though that like obviously game battles and MLG and the CDL are owned all by the same people, and yet there are different rules for these sites. And I, d- that, I mean, it makes sense from the perspective like there are different people playing for like these different sites. You know, obviously like the pros aren't necessarily playing like MLG variant, unless they, you know, obviously just want to play game battles or whatever. But it just seems weird that they're all different when you're in the same company. But that's kind of Activision Blizzard thing, I would assume. Um, but yeah, I'm honestly like I'm sure the pros would probably hate it, but Scrapyard Hardpoint, sign me up. Like, you know, Bokeh Hardpoint was fun. I don't like I love the small maps. Like those are my favorite maps. Like let's bring in shipment, get a shipment hardpoint going. Let's see if somebody can
Now,
drop 100,
now you're going rogue.
like 180 on a map. See if they could do that. But yeah, I think it would be interesting just to see how things go. And I know people have been saying about how Skid Row specifically is like a really bad hardpoint map, but at the end of the day, like there just aren't that many options, and you know we can't really do anything about it. I think at the end of the day, we just don't have more than really 6 total maps that could be 7 probably, because you could include Scrapyard as a potential, like certainly a potential S&D map. But like really you only have 7 maps that are viable for competitive in its current state. And I just, you know, we don't really have that many options, which is unfortunate. But that's just how it goes. Next thing that we have on the show, Heretics. They made a swap in their starting lineup. If you remember from probably like a month or two ago now, but when they officially announced their roster, they had signed 5 players, and they didn't seem to designate a starting 4 at the time. And before or just as MW3 launched, Journey had tweeted out that he was going to be a restricted free agent and that he was looking for a new team, and he was going to be playing in challengers for the time being, as he had been the odd man out of the Miami Heretics starting lineup. That has already changed, and now Journey is in the Heretics starting lineup, and Eric Boom is out, and he will supposedly be starting on the bench to start the season, which is an interesting change. What do you think about something like that, where obviously there have been no matches, there have been pretty limited scrims? Teams have been scrimming for less than 2 weeks. The maps and the game modes have kind of been up in the air. Spawns obviously not great in the first 2 weeks of a game for a bunch of maps that never had to deal with hardpoint spawns. So, what do you think about a team making this kind of change in their lineup before really getting a lot of time with that team?
I think that should have been the direction from the beginning for. Let me just restart there. I think when Heretics signed this roster, having 5 players and seemingly not being set on um a set, 4-man starting lineup, I think the right mindset going into the season was we have these 5 players, let's try out a bunch of different combinations and see what we can potentially get the best results from. The only situation where I feel like that wouldn't be the smartest thing to do with like in a scenario where you sign a 5-man roster, and it would be like, for the lack of a better example, if you had the Optic Dynasty and going into the next season you signed, like, we'll just use Maniac or Hitch as an example, you signed them as a sub. um Obviously you're not going to go into that season saying let's experiment with different forming combinations. But outside of drastic examples like that, if you have 5 players and you don't know which combination of them is going to lead to the best result, I feel like being open-minded and heading into the season and trying and to mix and match the players could potentially lead to the best results down the road. And that's what it seemed to be, a scenario here where that's what was going to happen. Then Journey tweeted on October 20th that he was essentially starting in challengers, which was the earliest indication we had of a potential starting lineup for Heretics. And then the latest development was the rotation saying that potentially Journey is going to start to replace Eric Boom, but there was also um, a tweet from Method Sick, who is one of the former Vamos guys from the Black Ops 4 days. Was this before or after?
His
I
tweet
think
was on the
this was
19th. So
Breaking Point's tweet was on the 19th, but in the morning. That's when it was edited, so it might have been or something. Regardless, I think Method Six tweet was probably in response to the news, but he tweeted, "Just wanted to inform the community that since day one, me and I don't know,
Noel
Noel,
Garberry.
yeah, sure." Me and another coach for Heretics included 5 players in our roster and never announced an official roster. We are currently testing things out to make sure we are ready to perform at our highest level. So that seems to match up with what I was saying earlier, and I think that's just the best approach. So the big thing to take away from here is that even if it's potentially being reported that Journey's now in and Eric Boom is out, one, out is not the correct term because Eric Boom's still a part of the Heretics, just out of the starting lineup. But two,
Yeah.
is that there could very well be another change even before the Major One qualifiers, and there could even be another change from Heretics multiple times throughout the season just because they have that 5-man team and trying to find whatever squad will lead to potentially the best results possible should be the goal for Heretics, and it seems like it is right now.
I think Minnesota did something similar last season at some point where they brought in Fame and they were trialing him as
Yeah,
in different spots, and they had came to the conclusion, I believe this is when they benched Attach, was that Fame was actually a better AR player and could slot in with that role better than he could with sub. And they ended up going with that. But I think that was essentially what they were doing. They were trying different variations of their 5-man roster to see which one would fit the best. And they ended up coming to the conclusion that Fame in the lineup and Attach out of it would be best, and then they ended up kind of switching it around
going
even
back.
closer at the end of the season, where Fame and Attach were both in the starting lineup, and they put Afro on the bench, which it got them to champs, I guess. So it worked out in a way. But yeah, I agree. Like, I think it's tough, obviously, that these coaches have like a pretty thankless job that they have to come to this decision with pretty limited practice, pretty limited film. Like, they don't really have that much to go on when they make these decisions about who's going to be the starting four, and they can't just make it, or they probably shouldn't make it the day of the first match. Like, that's kind of what some football teams do, where they refuse to say who their starting quarterback is throughout the entire offseason, throughout training camp, and then right before the first game they're like, that guy's the starting quarterback. And that's kind of how things go. It can work sometimes, it can throw off or be kind of a surprise for the opposing team, but it also doesn't instill a lot of confidence in the person, or in this case in that specific group that you're starting, or the person that's being left out to kind of be left in the dark until the very end. But yeah, it's a weird thing. And I also should mention that with certain COD contracts, I'm not saying that this is definitively what the Heretics have going on, but in some COD contracts, they make less money if they're not starting for their team. And obviously, like, that's pretty, like, I don't know if that ever happens in traditional sports. Like, I can't really think of a an example of that. Maybe getting sent down. Like, I don't know if, like, in MLB, where a major league player, if he gets sent down, if he makes the same amount of money he would in the majors. But that's like, if you get benched, if so say Kenny Pickett, if he gets benched by the Pittsburgh Steelers, he's making the same amount of money regardless, as long as he is like active on the roster and he can play. It's different if he's injured. But for Call of Duty, some of these guys make significantly less money if they're on the bench for a team rather than the starting lineup. But I think Temp had mentioned something like that he actually made less money playing and starting for the Las Vegas or the Paris Legion at that point than he would have made just being on the bench for the Los Angeles Thieves. So you know, it's different for them traditional sports because it's literally like life changing money in the NFL and the NBA. It's not life changing money, or it's um, maybe not for everybody. It's not life changing money if in the Call of Duty League. So I think that also has to be taken into account. But swinging back to my original point, the coaches, they have a really difficult position here to kind of choose who's going to start, who's going to be on the bench, and potentially kind of alienate that one player that thinks they should be starting and they're not, and they have to start the season in challengers, and who knows what's going on with challengers, which makes it even crazier for that person. So yeah, I think this is probably the best way to go about it. And it seems like they did change their mind, at least internally. Maybe Journey was maybe a little bit premature in tweeting that he was going to be in challengers. Now that he seems like he might be in the CDL, but like you said, there could be changes between now and the first match, or now in the first LAN, which is not even until January. So maybe after the Heretics or other teams get to see a few matches online against other CDL teams, then they will make that change. So there's really a lot that could happen in the next month or two for a lot of CDL teams, in all honesty. Let's talk about Scrap because he has been talking a lot about everybody. I don't know what got into him. I mean, he's always kind of been like this, but it seems like he's gone in overdrive in the first few weeks of the MW3 season. So he was talking trash to Karma and Scump, saying, quote, I retired you as well. Don't forget that. Don't forget it. Clay and Scrappy have been going back and forth on just numerous occasions. They scrimmed each other and they got in, like, I don't want to say they got into it, but they like beefed a little bit. Scrap said like a Bezian simp carried you to champs or to like a champs ring, and Clay's like, well, I have three. You know what happened to the other two? And they said like online for the Dallas Empire one, and Clay's like, what about the other one? So it's like it's kind of funny that they're going back at it. They're
Scrap was like, I'll give you the other one because I don't think you really say anything about AW Clay winning Champs MVP on
with
lane.
baby attach and and JCap and replays. So yeah, I think it's like I don't know whether to take Scrappy seriously with a lot of this stuff because he seems like he's just a troll. Like not even in a bad way, just like he enjoys this kind of stuff, so he just does it to get a reaction or to like crack up someone else. Because it never seems like it's really like mean spirited because he could say mean stuff about anybody he wants to, but it always seems like he's going at someone that can always defend themselves. Like he's going at Clay. Like I don't think Clay is self-conscious about his like 15-year career in COD. Like I don't think that's happening. But it was just pretty funny. At least it's given us some entertainment. What's your take on all of this? Because obviously we've talked about how much we like Scrap and how he's kind of
Oh yeah.
embraced, the villain role that Aches used to be, the king of it, especially with Optic. So what do you think about Scrap and kind of his resurgence as the villain?
Like you read my mind. I mean, that's where I was going with this. Was he Scrap might be the new age Aches. Obviously, he's got a lot of championships and rings to go to catch up to him in terms of accolades and stuff. But definitely in the trash talking department, it's one of the closest we probably had in a long time. Especially, we had those Black Ops 2 Ghost days where you got the famous nameless videos, and I think it was Ringhouse was the YouTube channel that had all the
Yeah.
yelling and screaming videos. But we've gone a long way from that over the years. But I feel like in recent years we've kind of gotten back to it a little bit more. And Scrappy has definitely been one of the more vocal players, certainly last year and certainly in some more recent years. So I obviously love it. Um, love the trash talk, and I think it is important. Like you said, it is kind of hard to tell sometimes if he's actually being serious or not. I think he might be in some cases. In other cases, I feel like it's kind of obvious he's doing it to be funny and stuff like that. But regardless of intent or anything like that, it definitely is entertainment, and that at the end of the day, that's the point. So, um, I as long as like kind of like you said, seeing it between Scrap and Clay is all good fun because Clay might be towards the end of his career, but not too long ago, he was one of those younger players who was able to talk some trash too and back it up. So that's the other important element too. You can't be somebody who talks trash and doesn't back it up. And obviously, Scrap Rookie of the Year last year, um, had some strong performances throughout the year. Well, I think he was an All Star, right? I think we had
I think so. Yeah, I
that
think he was first team All
conversation.
Star.
So I mean, he had a solid year last year, and his first year is only just getting started, and it's obviously a big difference between somebody talking trash and not being able to back it up, but when you're able to back it up. It makes it more fun in the long run as well. So I love it. I do think the first one of him saying that stuff to Damon and Scump might be a little out of pocket, but the Clay banter in pre-match scrims and stuff like that, I think that's all in good fun at the end of the day.
Well, if he's going at optic guys, like he has a death wish. Like someone's
Yeah,
gonna like send the SWAT team to his house one of these days. He's gotta be careful with that.
the Toronto facility.
Yeah. Um, but there was a breaking point put together, like a comparison of Clayster and Scrap.
Yeah,
And Clayster has 92 pro tournaments, and Scrappy has 6. It's like, and Clayster has 580 pro series as a in his career, and Scrap has 49. So it's like there's
that's why I included that link because I thought just the drastic difference in those numbers was just kind of ludicrous.
Yeah, like that's just so crazy to think. Like, and obviously, like Clayster's like an anomaly because the guys that he grew up playing with are like almost all retired. Like, I don't know if there's a single guy out there right now, like at least in the CDL, that would have played with him like in MW2 or even MW3, like because I mean, like Scump was obviously like one of those guys, but he's gone. Crim6, Karma gone. Obviously Aches. So like there really aren't that many of him. Many of those old guys that are still playing the game at a high level. So it's pretty ridiculous to see, but still, like to think that
And
he's played like 100 tournaments at a pro level is just ridiculous.
And that's a number that might not ever be touched. That was the other thing I was going to mention here too is that as we, Clay's eventually going to retire, hopefully. I know you don't hope it's anytime soon, but it's going to happen sooner rather than later. Um, and when that does happen, we're going to be eventually in an era where um, those longtime players who are in the days of playing like more than 5 tournaments in a year, well over more than 5 tournaments in a year. The difference between somebody like Scrap, who's only playing in the CDL, where there's only 5 majors in a year, every year, and a lower number of tournament compared to like those open circuits back in the day, like that drastic disparity between tournaments played is going to be cut down just because everybody who's in the CDL is going to have played the same matches. Like if we look at somebody, um, if we look at someone like Hydra and then somebody who joined the same year as Hydra, like they're going to have the exact same number of tournaments played because they have just been in the CDL since that point and uh, have only been it's not like there's UMG tournaments or anything like
Yeah,
that they can go to add on to the total. Like that's a fixed number that's not going to
yeah,
change for anybody as long as they're playing the entire season. So Hydra might have been a bad example because he had the visa issues and all that. But nonetheless, the point is being like somebody like Scrap. Let's use Scrap and Snoopy, right?
yeah,
Like in 5 years from now, if we want to compare, Scrap is going to have 5 more tournaments played than Snoopy if they both play in every tournament for the next 5 years after this because Scrap will just have one more season over him,
yeah.
and that's it.
Yeah. It's a completely different ecosystem that we're in right now because like you were saying, like there were MLG tournaments, there were UMG tournaments, there were UGC tournaments, there was esports World Cup, there was EGL, there
X
were
Games.
yeah, there were X Games, like there were a bunch of different local lands that people would go to. They would go to like What was the New York one that everyone would always go to, like J Rod or something like that? They would
Oh,
always go to like
Jersey, yeah.
the Jersey tournaments, and like that just doesn't happen. Like it, and like probably from like 2000, I don't know, let's say 2009 to 2015 ish, it was like teams would kind of pick and choose which tournaments they would go to. Like a lot of them would go to all of the tournaments because that's the best way to make a name for yourself, to make money, to win tournaments, to compete against the best. But some teams would just like choose not to go to like UGC Niagara, for example, or like they would like, or the PAX East tournaments, like where it was an invitational only, like only 8 teams. The Full Sail Invitational was only like a few teams that would go there. Now everybody goes to the majors. Like every team in the CDL goes to the majors, and really the only discrepancy will be between the challengers players and whether every challengers player is going to every challengers event. But even then, there are only going to be probably like at max 5 or at max 6 challengers tournaments this season. Likelihood there will be probably like 3, like in all honesty, because some of these majors won't have challengers tournaments, I imagine, and then who knows what's going on with well, challengers in general, but maybe the challengers finals. But yeah, like the Clayster versus Scrap stuff, I think the trash talk is maybe a little bit real, but obviously more kind of put on and just kind of like a fun thing for him to do. And like you mentioned, Clayster, that was kind of his thing. Like he was a hype beast essentially for literally his entire career. Like he was known for screaming across the stage, throwing up the threes. Like when he would sweep guys, he would like say somebody's choking. Like I mean, we need to bring back the ring house videos so we can get something close to what Killa's choo choo train was, because that was, by my expectation, is like that is the peak of Call of Duty. Like there's been nothing better than literally one of, at that point he was one of the best players in the world, or a former world champion at that point, literally screaming at his former teammate, I seen you shaking at champs. You're nervous. You're nervous. And literally the owner of a team trying to calm him down with like Hastro, like trying to calm Killa down is like, dude, chill out. Like this is crazy. Like they're in a ballroom of a convention center and he's going crazy. So like that was the peak of Call of Duty if I'm concerned. But you know, I'd love for that to come back. Probably not going to happen, but maybe if the CDL dies, we'll have to kind of reassess and make our priorities straight. Um, Also, Killa, someone to talk about in the news recently. Sloss has been retired for years now, it feels like. But he tweeted, said, is everyone still banning and GAing everything? If so, thank gosh I quit. And then Sib comes out of nowhere, said, you would be getting gunned by the new generation if you knew how the new CODs were. You'd be retired later than sooner, which is definitely a mistake. And Killa said, sorry, I'm confused. You play pro COD? And Sib said, no, sir. And Killa said, pick up a tool belt. Best advice I can give you before it's too late. I literally don't know why this happened because it's like the most random thing. It's like Chat GBT was trying to get in on some COD drama. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, because Killa and Sib beefing on Twitter about GAs was not on my bingo card.
Oh, I thought it was a really funny interaction, and I don't think it's that deep either, but um, I definitely got a good laugh out of it, so worth sharing. It actually looks like Sib deleted his tweets now too, but
Yeah, he did not get a favorable reaction from the fans.
I do think there is some merit to what he said, but obviously, some longtime fans might disagree. But I guess that does bring a question up of how Killa would perform in today's CDL. It might be a little different than some longtime fans remember, in my opinion. But obviously, respect to him as a former world champion, like you said. Um, and Sib is an up and coming player who's had a couple good years now. So, um, yeah, I just thought that was a really funny interaction, and who knows? Maybe we'll get like a version 2 if now that Sloss seemingly knows or potentially knows who Sib is. If Sib has a bad game or something, and Sloss decides to respond or tweet something on Twitter, that could be another um funny interaction there. But who knows? Well, probably nothing more from this, but definitely a funny interaction.
Oh yeah, people are definitely gonna like send him hammer emojis if it doesn't have a good game or something. I was actually thinking like like before this episode, and I was like thinking about this specific tweet and like Killa in general as like a COD pro, and obviously like he won COD champs like over 10 years ago. Like it was literally over a decade ago. Um and I was thinking like because people I think are pretty disrespectful of guys that peaked in like let's say like Modern Warfare 3 or Black Ops 2 or Ghost because it was a long time ago. Like let's be honest, I was in high school literally when that stuff was happening. But like I think it's like the NBA, like you really can't compare it. Like a lot of people try to like compare like Bill Russell or Wilt Chamberlain or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to like guys like that play today, like LeBron or Giannis or Jokic. It's like, well, I mean, like there's a lot of time that goes by. Like there's no way that you can like properly compare the two because while I'm sure like players that are good now, I'm sure most of them could be still good players if they were born 10 years earlier and they played COD just as much as they did now, as much as they did back then. But like if you if Killa was 18 years old right now and he got to watch all of the best competitive players and had the kind of practice of playing against some of the best players for years and years and then is turning 18, like I'm sure he would be good. Like I don't
Yeah.
think that it's really like, like it's kind of if you have a time machine and you brought them to this spot, they probably wouldn't be very good because that's just not how the game was played back in the day. And the same thing for traditional sports. But it's just like there's no reason to compare them. Like Killa has a ring just the same as someone like Abizi has a ring. Like these players, like yeah, I was trying to think of one, but like someone like replays, for example, like who has one, Killa has one.
As a coach and one as a player.
Okay. Who only has one? Who only attach, right? Attach only
There you
has
go.
one. So attach what is younger than Killa, and so they each have one ring. I don't think they really need to be compared in general. I don't think a lot of people are sitting at home being like, "Who's better, attach or Killa?" Like it's not a real big thing. But I just don't think that we should like be disrespectful of some of these older guys that probably could have made it if they had to in this day and age. It would be a little bit
And
harder with just like the way to come up because there's less access. Like there's a literal CDL. It's like a closed off league where it wasn't so much the case back then.
that's one difference, obviously, in terms of the come up, and there's not the S&D that some of these other guys came up with. But
Yeah.
the other big difference right away is just the money involved in the scene, and like guys like Killa were, we joke about the Ringhouse video and stuff, but they were literally playing like for the tournament money as their pay. Like
Yeah.
if they didn't win tournaments, they didn't make money because they weren't salaried or anything like that. Now you have guys making minimum 50K a year salary to play COD, where I mean, we could go back and look it up. Um, Outside of that champs win, I would be surprised if all of the Farigo wins even came close to a 50K minimum salary, and that was just for, I think that was 4 tournaments at the start of Black Ops 2. Obviously, champs would be the big one, but the other ones definitely didn't come close to 50K combined, and that's the minimum salary now for CDL. So obviously times have changed. Um, and who knows? Even somebody, obviously not like Killa, because I don't think he had a job while competing. But I know, like famously, there's like Slasher was going to college for robotic engineering or something like that
Yeah.
while he won COD champs in Black Ops 3. Like now players aren't going to school or at the same time, at least at the pro level. Obviously people in challengers are working 9 to 5 jobs or going to school still and then getting home to scrim and such. But at the pro level like that. It's just a big difference compared to the times, and that's what happens even in traditional sports. Times change, and uh, that's the way of life.
So MLG Dallas, which was the tournament before Champs in 2013, um, and I think that's like the first tournament that I remember. I don't even think I watched it live. I think I went back and watched it like on YouTube and stuff. But that total tournament prize pool was 50,000, and majors nowadays in the CDL are 500,000, and people want more sometimes about like these tournaments should be more money, blah blah blah. But like this was literally a $50,000 tournament, and so Impact won that tournament. They won $20,000 as a team, so they were splitting
5K.
that 5K taxes. Let's say they get like 3,000 each. Like I don't know how much it took to get them out into Dallas and to put them in a hotel, but like they weren't going home with very much money. Like it was more of like a prestige thing, like to win a championship. And obviously, like we have on Esports, we have the article of like the highest earning CDL players from like tournament winnings and stuff. And I think it's I think it's a BZ, but like it's usually been like an Atlanta FaZe guy because they won champs in like 2021. But like Arstees, who has only been a pro for maybe like 6, 7 years now, less than that probably. And he was the highest earning COD pro ever, and like I just think that's ridiculous because he hadn't won that many tournaments compared to some of the other guys. Like you think about the Optic Dynasty guys, had they had that kind of run in this like a little bit later where tournaments were more money on average, they would have made so much more money. Obviously, they were probably getting quite a bit of salary. They were making maybe quite a bit off of streaming and YouTube and everything and sponsors, but like from tournament winnings alone, they would have been it would have been pretty nuts in all honesty. So that it's just like a different era, like the same thing that happens in the NBA. Like Michael Jordan, like his total career earnings is like I don't know, like 45, 50 million, like in terms of salary, and guys make that in a single year in the NBA now that aren't nearly as good as Michael Jordan. So like that's just how it goes. I'm looking up my article real quick. So Abizi is the number one highest earner. Simp is number two. RC is number three. Crim6, who, that makes sense. Crim6, like the most winningest player in COD history. He's at four. Then Celium is at five, and he didn't even start up being a pro until like 2019. Same with Simp. So like these guys are in the top five, and they've been a pro for 4 or 5 years. And that's just kind of how things go, especially because um, Champs has become such a big money earner for these guys. I think the what was it, the 2020 online champs, that was like a $4.1 million pot or something like that, something ridiculous. And obviously Empire won that, and that's been great for them. But getting off on the point. Um, this flank tier list real quick. So the flank, they put together a CDL team tier list, ranking the 12 teams S through D. So S being the highest tier, D being the lowest. I guess we'll start at the bottom. So at D, they just have one team. It's the Los Angeles Guerrillas, and I'm assuming that. Yeah, so this was November 20th. So this is the new roster that they have. And then C, there are four teams: the Minnesota Rocker, the Las Vegas Legion, the Seattle Surge, and the Miami Heretics. B, three teams: LAT, or not London, Carolina Royal Ravens, and Boston. A, New York Subliners and Optic Texas. And S is the Toronto Ultra and Atlanta FaZe. Agree or disagree on any of these? Any of them like particularly egregious or something that you think, that you noticed that was like out of order?
So the big thing for me is I think it would be interesting to go and listen to the Flank episode to hear their reasoning behind some of this, because obviously anything that I would say for the teams would be based on just like purely the rosters on paper. I really haven't watched too many scrims or tournaments or anything yet. But what I had been saying earlier in this offseason was like it would be kind of in quadrants, where the top four in any order could really be Toronto, Atlanta, New York, and Optic, and I don't think anybody would really complain about that. And then that middle four and the bottom four was kind of like, just a smorgasbord, or a mix and mash there of a bunch of different teams. I think the one thing that stands out and that I would kind of agree with so far, just based on what I've seen on that CDL Scrim Intel post some screenshots and stuff of Scrim results. I feel like I've seen Carolina doing at least decently in some of these scrims, especially in comparison to when that roster was formed and announced. Um, so to see the flank put them in the B tier when potentially they were one of the last four teams to announce their roster, that could be a little that kind of stands out to me, and kind of means that that team might have a shot to turn some heads this year. So that was really the one that sticks out to me. I think even LA Thieves there, that's a team with a lot of young talent looking to bounce back in some ways for guys like Afro uh, and Cammy, and then like Jodeci's really had a rookie year to forget last year in terms of the structure around him at LAG and all that other stuff. And then Ghosty had a strong year in his time with Optic from an individual standpoint, but now in a different team, how's he going to perform? Questions like that. So, interesting team for LA Thieves, but middle of the pack here to start makes sense to me. And then obviously you just have LAG at the bottom. I mean, they still haven't officially announced their roster, and then there's the whole drama around that situation last week. So, not surprised to see them at the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you on like the quadrants idea, especially like the top one, Toronto, Atlanta, New York, and Optic. I think that's a pretty clear top four from just on paper, obviously, because we don't like I haven't seen Phase scrim at all, and I think that they're mostly scrimming off stream, and I think Optic is now gonna start streaming off scrimming off stream. And there's going to be a lot of teams that just don't stream their scrims anymore. So it's going to be interesting. I won't really know what to think about it until the season actually starts. And even then, like online play, like we're going to have a few online matches, and then we're going to have a break, and then we're going to have a few more online matches, and then a major. I don't. I feel like we're not really gonna know what these teams are made of until after the first major, because then we'll at least have 8 matches to see them. One match at minimum on LAN, and then we can kind of figure out where these teams are supposed to be. But maybe we'll do a little tier list of our own before the season
Yeah.
starts and kind of compare it as we go along throughout the season. Last thing that we have here is Greg Trimmer's arch nemesis. He went on Repulse's stream, and he was talking about snaking in MW3, which is a thing that a lot of people have been complaining about this season, because it is pretty prevalent, and there's been a lot of it, especially among pro players. There was that Celium one that I think it was Crone said he was snaking his dick off, and then there was one with Ghosty that I put in article I wrote at Esports, where he's behind Burger Town counter, and he's snaking Temp, who's top Eskies, and Temp is snaking him from top Eskies, so they're counter snaking each other. So yeah, it's been pretty prevalent. But Greg was on the stream, and he said that he's pretty much okay with people doing it. He said, quote, "If you're snaking, you are intentionally trying to mess with the game in that sense, but you're trying to get that advantage, and you can do it. So take advantage of it. If you can do it, and the game lets you do it." And he said that they're trying to strike a balance, so to speak, with the player experience of the person snaking and the person that is getting snaked. But he said that there's no bugs with it, that they're just letting players do it a lot, and they're actively investigating snaking. But I think it was funny though, because he said like the first thing he said was like, well, we're looking into like what can be done about it. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, bro, you know what can be done about it. I told you this the other day, but like CS:GO doesn't let, like, obviously you can't go prone in CS:GO or CS2, but like they don't let you spam crouch stand. Like you just can't do that really quickly. It makes you go in like slow motion after the second one. And that pretty much would be a really big bug or a really big feature for CS2 if you could just like up down up down up down and pretty much just like peak like at will, something that you can do in COD. But I just thought it was weird that he was saying like what can be done with it. It's pretty obvious. I don't know if you had any thoughts on this because I wrote the article for Dot, so I didn't know if you had any thoughts for it.
I mean, the funny quote you said, "You can do it. If you can do it, do it." And the age old adage at this point, you can do it two phase up. So, I'm pretty sure Celium was a little happy with that answer, but no, I think you hit the nail on the head. The fact that they're actively investigating it for some people is probably a positive thing, but on the flip side of that, the question of why something hasn't been done already, or as you mentioned, taking some inspiration from other games that have addressed it to some extent um, in their own titles, and using that for inspiration in COD, or why stuff like that hasn't been done is another question entirely. So I don't have much to add on it. It doesn't seem like it's going away anytime soon, and um, some people aren't going to be happy about that, but uh, at the end of the day, I do have to say it was kind of refreshing, even if some of the answers weren't what I personally or people in the community wanted to hear. The fact that a couple of developers from Sledgehammer were willing to go on the Twitch stream for somebody and talk live about the game and openly talk about some stuff is definitely a positive sign in my opinion of potentially a more open line of communication going forward. Fingers crossed with that, but yeah.
Yeah, they definitely came off a lot better than the Sledgehammer Reddit crew that just was actively ignoring all the skill-based matchmaking questions in the AMA. Even though there were probably approximately a million of those questions that they were just like, nope, 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 not going to answer that. But yeah, I think Sledgehammer came off pretty well. Even Greg and Tremor, he's not in the United States, I don't think, to hear this. So he's but when he listens to this, he's gonna shudder because that was just too far. I think that about does it. So we talked about the rule set, we talked about Heretics and Scrappy and all of the little peripheral stuff that has been going on in the COD community lately. Obviously, Thanksgiving is this week, so happy Thanksgiving to everybody that's celebrating. Not to you Canadians who were already doing it last month, very selfishly. But happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Hope you have too much food and it's all good and you can enjoy some time with your friends and family. We will be back probably next week, but if not, the week after. We're getting pretty close to the official start date for the 2024 CDL season, which is pretty exciting. I'm very glad that we're getting close to the end of this off season, if nothing else, because it's been a slog to try to, like, it's not like we're content creators in the general sense, but just to talk about stuff where you don't know if anything is going to happen for a month is not very exciting. So just having matches on every week or most weeks is going to be nice. So the first day is December 8th. So that is 2.5 weeks away from now, which, man, that's gonna fly by, especially with the holidays and everything. So we'll be giving our predictions and talking about the matches before you know it. But yeah, that's about it for me. Make sure to subscribe, like the podcast, follow the podcast feed, youtube.com. We're on YouTube at Ego Chat Podcast. Twitter, the Twitter is at Ego Chow Podcast. His Twitter is at JBink with 2Ks. Mine is at Prez Byers. If you want to watch this live stream live, you could go to twitch.tv/Ego Chow Podcast, or the YouTube channel also has it. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify. We're pretty much on everything, so you should be able to find our podcast no matter where you listen. Yeah, that about does it. Bink, take it away.
Yep. Thank you guys as always for all the support. As Preston said, we're getting down to it, and before you know it, we'll be into the season. So looking forward to that. And before we get there, though, like he said, happy Thanksgiving to everybody celebrating. And we'll see you right back here whenever we're live again. So yeah, until then, have a good one, and remember to send the chow.